Also, Bradford Roots Festival itself, I think, is a wonderful thing. I've been asked to play at one or two now, and it's a great thing to be able to celebrate a major achievement of people in and around Bradford-on-Avon, and that's the Wiltshire Music Centre. And it's that's going to form the basis of my little, I hope it's little, chat. Because I've got a very, very strong, heartfelt passion for the Wiltshire Music Centre. It meant an awful lot to me over many, many years. And it's only in recent years that I've started kind of hook up with again. So I hope you don't mind, but I really want to just sort of tell you a little bit about Wiltshire Music Centre, because I was very, very involved, along with thousands of others. I mean, my part was only a tiny bit. As far as I'm concerned, I moved to Bradford in the early 1980s, and we had 3 kids at schools in Bradford-on-Avon, Fitzmaurice and then St Lawrence. And right from the start, one thing that staggered me was how, I was never a trained musician, but it amazed me how all kids from all backgrounds and whatever their wealth and lack of wealth, and that had this opportunity to play a musical instrument. It may just have been recorders in the early years of primary schools, but as you went through the school system in Bradford-on-Avon, that's Fitzmaurice, Christchurch, and of course St Lawrence, there was always a chance to play, not just to get access to an instrument, but to actually play it, and to get tuition and to play it in public, and that really amazed me. I couldn't quite figure out how it worked. Fairly soon I figured out how it did work, and that was because of an organisation called the West Wilts Young Musicians. It was an amazing organisation. The chap in charge of it in those days was a bloke called James Monkton, but it was a big committee, very committed people, and loads of parents and teachers who worked alongside West Wilts Young Musicians to make it possible for all kids who went to state schools in West Wiltshire to get to play and to learn and to have access to musical instruments. And that's what happened. One of my fondest memories was, well, I say fondest, it wasn't at the time, was when our eldest son, who was already having piano lessons and becoming quite an accomplished pianist and chorister, he left one morning to go up to school, and he said, big day today, it's the open day. And what do you mean the open day? And he said, well, we've got an opportunity to go into school, and we will have access to loads of musical instruments, and we can choose which one we want to learn to play. And I want to play the trumpet. And we thought, fine, okay. Anyway, off he went, and later in the afternoon, around 4 o'clock-ish, we heard coming down the road this very raucous farting noise, and we thought, what the hell is going on there? And it turned out to be our eldest son, and he ditched the idea of trumpet, and he decided he wanted to play the trombone, which kind of suited him, really. He was quite tall, and he was quite fond of loud noises. I won't put it any stronger than that. And he came home with a trombone, and he had lessons. He had access to trombones, quite good quality ones later on, and he ended up being a very, very talented trombonist, and he ended up playing in a lot of bands and orchestras. He ended up playing in Europe at one point, with the, I think it was with the Wiltshire Youth Orchestra. But anyway, and this sort of spread through not just our family, but everybody's family. Is the fact that if you went to schools around here in West Wiltshire, it's a pretty good chance that you get to choose and learn to play, and play in public. That's the essential bit. An instrument of your choice, which is a phenomenal thing now you think about it. The last bit I mentioned about playing in public was quite important, because the key thing about West Wilts Young Musicians was that they put on these little concerts. Sometimes they were just in shopping centres and on street corners, and just as sort of a support act to some sort of concert in Civic Hall, Trowbridge or something. But it meant that kids could not just learn to play, they could get out and play with each other, but in public. And it didn't matter what the level. It could have been a total orchestra, could have been a jazz band, it could have been a sort of brass band kind of thing. Even sort of simple things like, I remember the Devises strings, and these were very young kids who just learned to play the violin. And they got the chance to play in public, and of course it went down a treat. It really did. Their parents and their friends and neighbours thought it was absolutely wonderful. I mentioned parents. The whole West Wiltshire Young Musicians thing depended on a lot of voluntary work, and the parents of these kids put themselves out every weekend, if not beyond, and they didn't just ferry their kids to these concerts, but they actually raised money through raffles and buying and selling things, and some amazing efforts from the parents of kids in the whole of West Wiltshire. It wasn't just Bradford on Avon. Anyway, just to divert things a little bit, at that time I was getting more and more involved in the schools in Bradford on Avon, and I was a governor and a sort of treasurer, unofficial treasurer of Fitzmaurice School. I'll never forget, in those days it was an extraordinary school. It was run by a bloke called Hugh Solomon, who was, if he'd got the job today, he would have been fired. Everything was just on the edge and rebellious, but the kids and the parents absolutely loved him. He did things like buying an old, I think it was a Royal Air Force bus, and he persuaded a lot of parents who were pretty good at mechanics to restore it. He got himself a licence, and he would actually drive the kids down to Cornwall and all sorts of places in this bus. He was just an amazing bloke. And I'll never forget, I was supposed to be the official treasurer for the school. It was before everything changed and schools became totally self-dependent on their finances, which I couldn't have done. And I'll never forget, he asked me to come into his office one day and said, "I think I've worked out next year's budget." I said, "Okay." And I'm not kidding you, it was on the back of a fag packet. And whether that saying was based on him, I don't know, but that's the kind of bloke he was. But everybody loved him, sadly no longer with us. But those were my days at Fitzmaurice. I also joined the governors of St Lawrence School. I wasn't clever enough to be their finance officer or whatever you call it. But I was just so keen on, my kids were all there at that time, and I just wanted to support it. And I did what I could. Anyway, going on from that, what happened was that I'd got to know James Monckton fairly well. James Monckton was the bloke behind the West Wiltshire Young Musicians. I'm not sure what his official title was, but it was down to him and 3 or 4 others on a sort of committee, and plus hundreds of supportive parents. And he said, "Do you want to join this new committee?" And I said, "What new committee?" And he said, it's called the Wiltshire Music Centre Steering Group. And I thought, what the hell? What's that all about? Anyway, I went along to a meeting and I was absolutely staggered. And what it was all about was that, I mean, the rumour has it, whether it's true or not, that James Monckton, now bear in mind that the West Wiltshire Young Musicians were using St Lawrence School as a base, really. Kids didn't all have to go there, but a lot of instruments were stored there. They used the school for rehearsals and all sorts of things, and they kind of depended on St Lawrence School giving them access to a lot of storage space and music rooms and things. And James Wetz was the head teacher then, and there is this story that they were walking across the playground and wondering about how on earth they were going to allocate the time and get other organisations within the school to keep out of the way so that the musicians could have access to the school hall and various places. And they came up with this idea: why don't we just create a separate room, a separate part of the school which can be used purely for music, and we can hire it out to other schools within West Wiltshire so they can pay for the classrooms, storage area, maybe some rehearsal rooms, very simple low-level building. And they were going to call it the Wiltshire Music Centre. And they formed a committee, and it was made up of all sorts of people. I mean, the main, one of the most interesting, when I say main, because that's a crucial word, a lady called Joan Main, who I believe was head of Wiltshire Council at the time. And she really wanted to represent Wiltshire Council in making this whole project viable. And there was a retired architect who came up with this lovely little model. It was a single story, very low level building, looked like a sort of a bunch of glued together chalets. And it just fitted the purpose. It was great. It was using a tiny little bit of the school playing field. And by then, the committee had already persuaded Wiltshire Council to let them use a little bit of what were then very, very ample school playing fields at St Lawrence, and use it for this specific purpose, not for sport, but for the arts. And the deal was they had to agree a rent. It couldn't just be done for nothing. And it was called a peppercorn rent, I gather. And I believe it was £1 a year. So for £1 a year, West Wiltshire young musicians could, amongst all the other people involved in it, allocate this bit of land to build this little school's music centre. Absolutely brilliant idea. And I was completely hypnotised by the whole idea. So I agreed to join them. And the money wasn't a big issue. I wasn't an accountant. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was quite happy to sort of keep track of what was being spent and what was coming in, and also to join in all the various projects that they did. So at that time, it was just starting to get going, and the way things were working was that a lot of the parents and kids and teachers, I mustn't forget to mention the teachers, loads of teachers were involved in this, were kind of fundraising not just for West Wiltshire young musicians, but also specifically for the Wiltshire Music Centre. And they tried to get a lot of publicity by saying what it was all about, what it was for, how many kids could benefit from it. And they started these amazing fundraising projects. And it was mostly down to parents and their kids doing these little concerts all over the place. Selling, my wife and I used to sell loads of raffle tickets and tear them up, and people would donate prizes, people would buy and sell things. Loads of people did loads of amazing things to try and help raise money to support this whole idea. I seem to remember that the target at that time was something like £200,000 to £250,000 to build this relatively simple single story building, which would accommodate the instruments, the classes, and maybe the odd little performance. The obvious things like toilets and maybe a kitchen and car parking had to be incorporated, of course. But that was what it was all about. It wasn't just about sort of voluntary efforts. It was about we arranged quite a lot of concerts. The concerts were very good, I thought. I had to go to all of them because I was involved in them. And we had, for example, I think at one point, we had the National Youth Orchestra came and played. Kenny Ball's Jazzmen, would you believe, played there. I don't think they played for nothing. We had Andy Shepherd, the great Bristol-based jazz saxophonist. He played for, I don't know whether he played for nothing, but I think he played for a fairly modest fee. But the most interesting was was a band called Jesus Jones, who were massively popular at that time. And the lead singer happened to be someone who went to St Lawrence School. And I think he agreed that they would play for nothing as a tribute to what he thought was his amazing upbringing. And the really sad bit was that we could have packed the place out. This was staged in St Lawrence Main School Hall at that time. And the sad bit was that the previous day, the local fire inspector came round to make sure everything was safe. And he said, "No, it's not. You can't have more than 60 people in this hall." And we just couldn't believe it. We had to comply with it. There's no way we couldn't do it. And Jesus Jones loved it because they had a sort of small but very, very friendly audience. But they could have had an audience 10 times that big. But they helped us raise a bit of money. They could have raised a lot more, and it's so sad it really was. But there we are. These things happen. So those were the kind of things that were going on. Now things were kind of going along. We were getting local funds to help us, as well as all the parents and teachers and kids who were raising funds for us. It was hard going. It was a few years of fairly tough stuff, and most people were putting a lot of effort in for nothing, because they were so convinced that the project was worth doing. But then things started sort of, I don't know, worrying us a bit, because we had this target and we were getting close to it, but people were worn out. They were getting tired. It was getting to sort of 1990, 91, 92. And I think there were so many other things going on, and people's kids were leaving the school, obviously. So we thought things might need to change a little bit. We were joined somewhere around that time by a bloke called Philip Scott. I think he was head of Wiltshire Schools Music. I'm not sure what his official title was, but he was a very, very big force within Wiltshire music. And he was invited to join the group. And he was great, because he just started throwing a few little fireworks in and saying, well, what about this? Are you sure that's right? What do you need to do? And he started sowing the seeds of this idea that maybe we had to get help, because we'd done an awful lot within our own community and our own committee. And it was getting to a point where the income was slowing down, and we weren't quite sure whether we would actually get there. And one of his ideas that we should actually seek professional advice to see where we were going. And he introduced us to this chap called, I think he was called Christopher Crowcroft. And he was a partner in a big company in London who got this big reputation for raising funds. I think they'd raised about £1 million for some music venue in Cardiff, and I think they'd been involved in fundraising for the National Opera as well. So they got this reputation, and he was one of the partners. And the reason I think this is important, not just because of what happened afterwards, but because the other day, believe it or not, I was doing a bit of tidying up, and I found the minutes of a meeting, and it was dated 1992. And the minutes were, the attendees were listed as me, Philip Scott, and James Monkton of West Wiltshire Musicians. And it was a meeting with Christopher Crowcroft. And it was quite interesting, because his recommendations, and the committee had agreed, I think they agreed that we should pay £150 for our consultation with him. And the outcome of this, his recommendations were really quite drastic. First thing he said was, as Philip had said, you need professional help, because you're not really going to get there. And apart from anything else, if you do build this, if you succeed in raising enough money to put this building up, how are you going to run it? Who's going to pay for its maintenance? Because local authorities are finding it more and more difficult to pay their bills. And you can't guarantee that the local schools will be able to afford to rent the rooms. So how are you going to pay for it to survive? And the other thing that they suggested was that you should seek, I know this was a bit of selling his own company, you should maybe use some of your 200 whatever it was £1,000 to actually hand some money over to a company, and they will take over the burden of finding the money for you. That's their job, and they will do it. So that was quite drastic. And the other thing, the first hint that one way forward is to think much, much bigger. Not just have little classrooms and storage areas, but actually have a concert hall, because that will bring in revenue. And of course our reaction was, great, but we'll never persuade the committee to do this, because they worked so hard. Anyway, we presented the minutes of this meeting to the steering group, and the initial suggestion was that we actually go and see this company, go and visit them, and hear what they've got to say. And we did. And it was Philip Scott and I went off to London in my in my company car, and we had this 2-hour meeting with this firm in London that had got this massive reputation for raising money for musical projects. And we came back. We stopped and had tea on the roof at the Barbican Centre in a little cafe, and then we drove home and we prepared this presentation to make to the steering group, thinking they'll think we're mad, because what we're saying is we've got to raise a hell of a lot more than we have already. We've got to put ourselves in the hands of somebody else, and we've got to build a concert hall. And anyway, we went there with the flip chart, and we were in the library at St Lawrence School, and I'll never forget it. And Philip and I put on this presentation, thinking, that's it. We've done all we can. Goodbye. And they said, yes. And I was staggered, absolutely staggered, that these people, many of whom were had been working very hard at this for years, and it was all they could do, and all their volunteers to raise 200,000, and we were now saying we're probably going to have to raise at least $1 million, but we need to make some big decisions. One of the big decisions was that this company that we'd been to see suggested that this thing called the National Lottery. Have you thought of that? No, never thought of that. Now, the problem with the National Lottery was that if you want some money, you've got to raise the same amount yourself. So if you want to raise £500,000, you've got to raise £500,000 of your own, and then the lottery will match it. But we didn't know about any of this stuff. We also hadn't thought of this concert hall thing. But I'm so delighted that when we came away from that meeting, Philip and I just sort of thought, right, that's it. We've done our bit. It started getting a lot more professional now, quite rightly. And as it's turned out, that was exactly what had to happen. But if we hadn't got that far, we couldn't have done. If we hadn't raised that £200,000 or whatever, we couldn't have afforded to put ourselves forward to professionals and saying, look, this is what we've done. Can you help? We got to a point where that was now possible. But of course, one of the problems was that we had to pay these consultants from the money we'd raised, which was not an easy thing to think about. We had to think about the lottery and being able to commit ourselves to them and say, we can raise as much as you can. So we had to get a lot more higher level help, which was a bit of a shame because the people on that committee had done so much. So new people were brought in, and I'll never forget that one person we brought in, apart from hiring this company to help us, we brought into the committee a professional, very experienced fundraiser. And it was a lovely bloke. I'm not going to name him, partly because I can't remember, but I wouldn't do it anyway. And he was a retired brigadier, and he got this massive reputation for raising charity funding. And we actually interviewed him and employed him. He was the first employee of the committee. But he was such a modest bloke. He never called himself brigadier. He wouldn't let anybody know he was a brigadier. And probably half the committee didn't know he was a brigadier. The other one was that Joan Main, the chairman, decided to invite the Lord Lieutenant of Wiltshire to join our group. Now, the Lord Lieutenant of Wiltshire, their position only lasts for a year, and during that year they have to name a charity. And they'd all got this reputation for raising hundreds of thousands of quid for their chosen charities. And she persuaded this Lord Lieutenant of Wiltshire to choose the Wiltshire Music Centre as his charity. An amazing thing to do. Anyway, I remember this meeting where the two of them were at the meeting together for the first time. And the Lord Lieutenant kept sort of looking over at this very humble, gently spoken little chap who was our new employee for raising funds. And when he was introduced, he said, "Weren't you a brigadier?" And this chap said, "Yes, I was." And he was obviously very embarrassed. And from then on, the Lord Lieutenant always called him Sir every time he spoke to him. Anyway, it was getting to that kind of level. We were having to put a lot more concerts on. We were having to try and raise funds to match what the National Lottery could do. The concerts were getting bigger. We were applying to loads and loads of big national authorities to try and help, and still raising funds from local kids and parents and their concerts. So nothing changed really, but some bigger stuff was going on at the same time. And so it got to a point where I thought, I can't do this anymore. I'm a bit out of my depth. I'm not an accountant. I'm not somebody who gets involved in raising funds and that kind of stuff. I was still a governor of 2 schools, and it was all getting a bit bonkers. So I backed off, and when I left, they employed a professional accountant, and it's a good thing they did, because things started getting very complicated. I don't think I could have handled it. So I left, and I said, "That's it. Good luck. We've had I've really enjoyed it, but I've got other things to do." And I didn't have any more to do with the music centre. I didn't go to the ceremonial opening. And the next time I went to the music centre was about 12 years ago, when Lisa and Chris Samuels started these Bradford Roots festivals, which are a wonderful thing. It's just a weekend in January where local people are involved in the music centre, not just going there, but actually performing there. And I absolutely loved it. And I've done 2 or 3 since then, and I adore it. Anyway, that's me, and that's the Wiltshire Music Centre. I might have got a lot of facts wrong. There might be people out there thinking, "Hang on, you can't say that," but that was my memories. Anyway, I've done a lot since then. I've luckily, in the last few years since retirement, I've been able to spend a lot more time on playing my own music, especially in the last year. So I'm going to play you a song, and this song is relevant because it's most of my songs I specialise in old Delta blues and stuff like that. I research it, I lecture on it, I try and play it. But every now and again I write my own song if something means a lot to me. And I wrote this one about 10 years ago. I always said if ever I made an album, I would call it the Avon Delta Blues. It's kind of a joke. And it did happen. So this is my own song, and it's all about the first hour of every day I spend just walking down the canal towpath to the River Avon, and it's part of how lucky we are to live around here. Anyway, thank you very much, and thanks a lot, Lisa and Chris, for letting me join in this project, which I think is incredible, and I hope it works. Avon Delta Blues. To the river again, I go down to the river again. Whenever I see blues creeping up on me, I go down to the river again. I go down to the waterside, down to the waterside. Whenever I hear bad times coming near, I go down to the river again. I'm gonna put on my walking shoes. I'm gonna put on my walking shoes. Even though I know bad times come and go, I go down to the river again. go down to the river again. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.